Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on January 21st, 2021. I'm experimenting with some special effects here. Might as well have some fun while we're doing this. Let me know what you think about it. Meanwhile, we've got some interesting news. Greg Gonsalves, Gonsa something, Gonsalves, uh, Yale University School of Public Health and School of Law. Uh, Subscribers who've been with us for more than a minute and who've been paying attention know that we outed this guy nearly a year ago. In fact, we've outed a lot of the COVID underlings and operatives. It's really easy to go after you know Gates and Fauci and Klaus Schwab, and that's what all the $1 million podcasters and the independent journalists do. We actually dig and find out who are the operatives, who are the guys that do the work, because Fauci ain't doing the work. Gates ain't doing the work. He's got legions of people that are helping him do what he does. And we've outed many of them. We've made films about them. We've been doing it for a long time. Obviously, we've been a little bit busy with the other breakthrough that we've had, which is getting the nurses finally, at long last, on the radar screen. We're going to do a lot more of that. And we're also, of course, working to inform people about the horrible, catastrophic. I mean, there's no words for what's going on in Gaza. All based on lies, all based on fraud, and we're trying to help people understand and detangle all the fraud that's going into that story. But in any event, we're going to take a little trip down memory lane. Nearly a year ago, we featured a guy named Paul Gonsalves, public health, School of Public Health at Yale. He's a profoundly sick and disturbed individual, and of course, he's been elevated to great heights by pharma. Anyway, he's recently been outed. I love the term outed, and you'll see why in a second. He's recently been outed as the guy that came up with the 6-foot fraud. Remember that? That's the fraud that closed all the small businesses in America, all the restaurants, all the cafes, all the barbershops, all the hairdressing salons, all the bowling alleys, all the sports arenas, can we think of any more things that closed? All the churches. Did I mention churches? Did I mention cultural venues? Basically closed down everything except the Fortune 500 operations like superstores and big supermarkets. He's the man behind that. He's the one, professor at Yale, public health, that testified under freaking oath that this is a good system and we should follow it. Well, somebody finally got a few minutes to really dig into that 6-foot thing. We've told you it was a fraud from day one. Didn't have the time to get into the details. Thought common sense was enough. Found out common sense wasn't enough. But anyway, all these years later, one of these journalist investigators has finally gotten a clue. And what have they done? They found out that it all traces back to Gregg Gonsalves, the Yale University fraud. And how did he justify making this a recommendation to the federal government under oath? He said they were doing it in China. And then he put a footnote. And the footnote happened to come from an article in a newspaper. In other words, bullshit piled on bullshit piled on bullshit. And that's what shut down your small business, your community, your church, your civic group, your daycare, your schools. Oh, I forgot the schools. We shut down all the schools, didn't we? For all the kids, in this sick country, for years. And that can all be traced back to Paul Gonsalves was a great saxophone player. I'm talking about Gregg Gonsalves. And we gave you his history. Let me give you more of his history because you need to know it. It's very important. And if you watch Fauci's First Fraud or get the book, you will see that one of the things that we talk about is how Fauci worked closely with pharma and a group called ACT UP to stampede people into taking AZT. And guess who was leading that parade? Yes, sir, it was Gregg Gonsalves.
ACT UP wanted to speed up the approval process for new drugs.
One of our greatest demonstrations and most famous was at the FDA. was over 1,000 demonstrators, almost all people with HIV, demanding to be heard.
I know that there are drugs out there that can save my life, and I want to know why they're not being tested more quickly.
I began to get beyond the rhetoric and the theater of the demonstrations and to really listen to what it is that they were saying. So I invited a group of them up to my conference room, and we spent a couple of hours talking about their concerns. And again, it just confirmed in my own mind that most of their concerns were really quite valid.
So to explain this for people that might be new to this particular kind of fraud, here's how it works. You create a fake activist group to push an agenda seemingly on behalf of society or an oppressed minority, when in fact you're controlling that group for your own purposes. Now, does that mean that everybody who was ever a member of ACT UP or ever went to a demonstration was in on it, in on the game? And the answer is no, because part of the game of creating these fake groups is also to attract legitimate people, mislead them, and weaponize them. And that's exactly what the drug companies did with ACT UP. Now, the question is, were they playing Tony Fauci, or was Tony Fauci playing along? Let's take a close look at an in-depth narrative he gave about his experience with ACT UP. Watch his body language, and you tell me.
Very early on in the course of this pandemic, the activists were making extremely good points about the uniqueness of this, the need to do more, the need to be less rigid in our regulatory approaches towards the approval and testing of new drugs, and the rigidity and lack of flexibility in how we design clinical trials, all of which were the classical way to approach drug development, therapeutic developments, clinical trials, and FDA approval. They wanted to get our attention, so they would do it in a very theatrical way, and they scared a lot, because for the most part, the scientific community and the regulatory community are conservative. And I say conservative, I don't mean conservative in an ideological, political way, but conservative in their approach towards science. It's nice that people are interested who are not scientists, but leave them out of it and lets us scientists make the decision. So they didn't pay much attention to the activists. I, for one reason or other, began reading intensively what they were writing, and even though when they were demonstrating and closing down Wall Street and invading St. Patrick's Cathedral and doing things like that, looking very eccentric and scary to some people, I try to phase that out and just listen to what they said and read what they wrote, and they were making perfect sense. So since I was always out there as a government official, they equated me, my face, my name, with the federal government. So they began to demonstrate against the NIH. And right here on our campus, they, came in, invaded the campus, smoke bombs, wanting to get arrested. And I made probably the best decision in my interaction with community, is that I agreed with what they were saying.
We weren't just given handfuls of AZT, we demanded it. We didn't think clearly about what it was we were asking for. It's like that saying, be careful what you ask for, it may come to pass.
So this guy who 40 years ago contributed to the death of hundreds of thousands of people who were railroaded into taking a toxic drug based on hysteria and fraud is now rewarded with a professorship at Yale. He also got a MacArthur grant. And what's his specialty? Making sure we stop epidemics and making sure we help disadvantaged people get all the vaccines we want to give them. That's literally what this piece of shit does for a living. And he's on every single, I didn't notice this. Even though we did the story almost a year ago, I didn't notice that he'd been on every woke, half-assed, insane news outlet continuously during COVID, pushing the hysteria. He was one of the primary pushers of that. So let's take a look at some other stuff that's going on. All right, so if all's going well, you're looking at the Yale School of Public Health, where only geniuses go to school. And again, we are now just January 21st, 2024, right? Okay, just take it for granted that's what it is. And this is what they've got on their Facebook page. COVID. People are still dying of COVID. And what are they pushing? Pharma's solution, Paxlovid, has been shown to reduce hospitalizations and death for unvaccinated patients at risk of severe disease by nearly 90% if you started it within 3 days of symptoms, but it's still underused. Well, this is fraud piled on fraud, piled on fraud, piled on fraud, which is all these people really know how to do. But they're talking about, now I've misplaced this here. That's okay. Oh, here. Yeah, there we go. It's in the caption. Why are 1,500 Americans still dying of COVID every week? Well, our nurses, in what the nurses saw, are telling you that. They are using a protocol still that makes it flies in the face of all previous medical practice. It has no scientific basis at all, and it makes no common sense logic. But they're still doing it, and they're still killing people with it. So how many people are dying of COVID? I don't know. How many people are dying of the protocols? I actually don't know the answer to that, but I know these protocols kill. And I know they will put you on a COVID protocol, even if you go in with a hangnail. If you go in with a hangnail and you test positive for COVID and you're not strong and you don't have advocates to help you, you may find yourself on the COVID death conveyor belt. Just a fact. And who's pushing it? Dun, 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 dun. Gregg Gonsalves, Yale School of Public Health. But let's see, am I being unfair to him? Here he is again. Here he is again, right on the home page. Let's hear what he has to say.
Policies and decision making. In the 1970s, there was an outbreak of a disease in a hotel in Philadelphia in which members of fraternal organization, the American Legion, were infected with some sort of illness. Within weeks, we had figured out that this was the emergence of a new disease by an existing pathogen called Legionella, colloquially defined as Legionnaire's disease. But the American biomedical establishment moved quickly to determine who is at risk, what was causing this disease, and to stop it in its tracks. At the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, met by sort of benign neglect, disinterest from the people who could have slowed the outbreak when it started in 1981, but it mattered who was getting that disease. Again, it was gay men, it was people who used drugs, it was sex workers, it was poor people, and they simply didn't matter. They were disposable. When we talk about neglected diseases, I often ask the question, neglected by whom? There are many diseases that we don't worry about in the United States, but they are either treatable or require more research, which we just simply ignore around the world. Yale School of Public Health has many people working on many of these neglected tropical diseases, but they don't get very much spending by the National Institute of Health or other research agencies in the United States. It's because who gets them? It's not Americans, it's not Americans who matter. It's people outside of our borders who even matter less to people at the top here in the United States. Paul Farmer wrote a book.
So he's presenting himself as, the great hero of humanity. He's, cloaking himself in this this veneer of respectability and humanitarianism. Always, they're going to help Africa, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, and they're going to advocate and all this. No, 90% of his effort is advocating lockdowns, advocating mandatory vaccinations, basically doing the bidding of pharma. And let's remember, this is the guy that invented and swore in a statement to, I guess it was Congress, that the 6 feet distancing made a difference and made medical sense. All this mayhem, this trillions of dollars in damage, thousands and thousands of lives ended and destroyed and injured, all came from this man and his fraud. And now he's going to present himself as, oh, we care about the Africans. They don't give a rat's ass about the Africans or anybody else. So if you think I'm exaggerating, let me show you this. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from COVID. If we want to mitigate the great existential threat to our survival. And what is that, Greg? From microbes to the warming planet, we're going to need we're going to need bolder thinking than getting back to normal. And who wrote this? Gregg Gonsalves. And when did it appear? December 27th, 2023. That's only a month ago. We're into 2024 right now, but that's only a month ago. And note the picture. People of color, because he cares so much about them, wearing masks on Christmas. December 27th, 2023. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from COVID by Gregg Gonsalves. Do you see a pattern here? All right, so this is my second recording of this, so I can't remember if I actually told you this part or not, so I'm going to repeat it if I forgot it. See, I got to do these things in the spare time I have. I don't have time to like sit down and script everything because I'm doing a lot of things. During the 1980s, and it's all in our book, Fauci's First Fraud, and you should get that book. And even if you don't want to get the book, go to faucisfirstfraud.com and watch the documentary that we put out in August of 2020. Yeah, we're so far ahead of all this stuff. It's almost embarrassing to the other people. I kind of wonder, what are they doing? Anyway, we put that out in August of 2020. The guy that invented the 6-foot fraud, the guy that wants to help Africa because he just cares so much. He was way back there in the 80s, and he was Pharma's man in ACT UP, and he took that rights group, and he helped with a bunch of other sinister people steer it in the pharma agenda. And what did they do once they got control of the ship? They created a demand for AZT. They demanded that the government make it available, and they demanded that it be distributed. This is what Tony, the scumbag Fauci wanted, and he got it. And he and Gregg Gonsalves and all their fellow misfits succeeded, according to John Lauriston, Harvard graduate, trained in statistical analysis, longtime gay rights person. He says he estimates AZT killed at least 300,000 gay men. Now, he was only counting the gay men. He wasn't counting the African-American women and their children, all poor, who were forced on this thing. He wasn't counting all the Africans who were given AZT if they had malaria or if they had just garden variety dysentery. They were given AZT and killed. He's like, John didn't count them. He just counted his constituency, and he estimates it at 300,000 people. And now let's go back to the great, we're going to help Africa. This, we're going to, basically what they're doing is they're covering a homicidal pharma scam. So they're making money on the one hand, and they're eliminating undesirable people on the other hand. So it's great. It's a great business. I mean, they really know what they're doing. And of course, here we are in 2024, and Gregg Gonsalves is running this ridiculous Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from COVID in 2023. He's still at it. He's still at it. He's not going to let up. But he's been outed, as they sometimes say. He's been outed. And I think he deserves the label of Anthony Fauci Jr. because he caused at least, he's not as famous yet as Anthony Fauci, but he caused at least as much damage as Fauci. And some of the lies that he helped perpetuate, including the 6-foot distance, will keep you safe from COVID. That came from him, and it was based on fraud. And the only way it was considered acceptable was that it came from a Yale professor. It came from a Yale professor, so it's got to be right. Well, it wasn't right. It was based on nothing and a degree of fraud. And he swore to it, apparently. This was like a sworn statement to Congress or something. How many trillions of dollars? How many hundreds of thousands of lives? And if that wasn't enough, don't forget, this was the guy, and I think hopefully if all goes well, we're going to play the clip next, that we put out nearly a year ago, where we show this guy shilling and pushing. You got to get your 2 shots in your booster. That's Gregg Gonsalves, and he's wrapping it all in this equity, and we love the African people, and we love the disadvantaged, and we really want to help them. Yeah, right, Greg. I don't know what, I mean, this guy's, you could just look at him. He's obviously not all there. But it doesn't matter because those that need him are elevating him, just as they elevated Fauci. I mean, they've given him a professorship at Yale. I mean, that's a pretty good gig. They've also given him a MacArthur grant. He's on every single, I didn't realize this until very recently, actually. He's on every single woke mainstream TV news program. Anytime they need someone to push a drug or push a vaccine or push a mandate or push hysteria, you can count on this guy to come out from under the rock he lives under and shill. I pointed this out very early on that unfortunately, for all of us, the gay rights movement completely subverted by pharma, going way back to the 80s, and they have a desperate need to present the world as completely vulnerable and likely to die of disease at any moment. And we have to be eternally vigilant, and we have to test everybody for everything all the time. This is mental illness, folks. This is straight up mental illness. So we have to be, test people. We have to separate people. We have to mask people. We have to vaccine people. We have to send them into the hospital and put them through the most, insane and obscene medical procedures to stamp out COVID. And if it kills hundreds of thousands of them in the process, hey, c'est la vie. C'est la vie. That seems to be, again, it seems to be part of the deal. It's like they don't just want to sell drugs. They don't want to just enforce an authoritarian regime. They also seem to want to murder a lot of people, or end the lives of a lot of people, or facilitate the end of the lives of a lot of people. And I want you to be absolutely crystal clear. This Gregg Gonsalves guy is right at the heart of it. And he is Fauci Jr. Fauci's on his way out. But so far, Gonsalves has managed to slither around and stay out of the limelight. Well, I'm glad this journalist just last week made the traced the 6-foot distancing right back to Gonsalves' door. That's good. I noticed apparently in the article, he tried to be in touch with Gonsalves, and Gonsalves responded by erasing his own Twitter channel. I haven't confirmed that personally, but that's how these people are. It's a shame. It's a terrible shame that so many of these criminals were able to use Twitter and other outlets to foster hysteria, to spread absolute lies, to encourage unhinged, vicious, destructive behavior on society. And now, with the push of a button, all their statements are disappearing. But there's a lot of him on video, man. We got some of it. This is a bad guy. This is one of the worst of the worst. If you didn't like what was done to you under the Fauci regime, you need to know that Gregg Gonsalves is still at work, still shilling, still pitching, still trying to get you vaccinated for any crazy thing that passes through their demented minds. And he's a fantastic tool for the pharmaceutical industry. He's a gift from heaven for them. Do you think I don't like this guy? You get that sense? And his name needs to be on everybody's lips, and everybody needs to know what he's done and continues to do, which is spread terror, using fraud, using his platform at Yale. And this is a multi-decade career of this. Someday, some real investigative journalist, I haven't found many out there, is going to do a deep dive into the specifics of how ACT UP was converted into a pharmaceutical product merchandising outfit. The reason I bring this up, guys, is, and you may know them, there are millions of people all over the world who think that ACT UP was one of the great moments of American democracy, one of the great exhibitions of direct action. What a sad, sad, sad fraud. And to bring this full circle, it's not just Greg Gonsalves, though he was one of the ringleaders. It's all these millions of people who, in their delusion and in their ignorance, their abysmal ignorance, helped push and foment first the COVID terror, then the forced masking, and then the coerced vaccinations. And now, of course, they're all, you know, looking the other way, and well, I'm glad that's over, and yeah, that was pretty extreme, but you know, you really should get Fauci's First Fraud if you haven't gotten the book, or if you have gotten it and haven't seen the movie, which we give away for free. It's at faucisfirstfraud.com. You really should watch this thing to understand how they laid down the fraud in the 1980s and how they took out their fraud playbook and they put it, back into effect for COVID, and how they had built through the first fraud literally an army of 1 million useful idiots led by demented, sinister people like Greg Gonsalves. So, and again, we're the only country. This is a fact. I know people hate facts, especially in this arena. They just hate facts. We're the only country that even makes COVID vaccines available to people under 60. And we go all the way down to 5 and up. And if these monsters could have children injected with that vaccine at birth, they would do it.
I feel like there must be something to learn from the AIDS movement in terms of how to make a bad government response better.
Well, for many of us, it's deja vu all over again.
Yeah.
It was death by public policy in the 1980s, where we had malign neglect by the Reagan administration that let tens of thousands of Americans die before the president even uttered the word AIDS.
Yeah.
And it's been 30 years, and we've seen other health crises come and go, and presidents, Democratic and Republican, rise to the challenge. Now, all these years later, we have another president, again, malevolence and incompetence put together to really imperil many, many more people in the United States than ever were imperiled by HIV in the early days.
The gay community was so galvanized by AIDS, and the AIDS activist movement was so inflected by the gay community, especially in the early days, because that community was so disproportionately hit by the epidemic. This epidemic is a pandemic. It's everywhere. It seems to show no demographic contours at all in terms of susceptibility. I wonder if that makes you think, how that makes you think about the possibility of building, I don't know if it has to be a movement, or building some sort of effective citizen feedback loop so that our government feels like they can no longer stay this bad in their response.
Well, we have to build a large coalition pretty quickly. And it's interesting that this disease is going to impact people who also are impacted by the AIDS epidemic, the incarcerated, immigrants, people of color, people who are underinsured or uninsured totally. So we have a lot of work to do in building bridges with movements that already exist, immigrants' rights movements, the Dreamers, people working on prison abolition, to try to build a movement very, very quickly to get our government to get off the dime and do what's right. We don't have months and years for this. We have days and weeks to get it right.
I want to talk to you about treatment and vaccine politics and some of the other ways that you have learned the hard way how to try to influence the government, even in places that don't like to be susceptible to pressure. If you could hold on with us for one segment. Gregg Gonsalves is an assistant professor of epidemiology at Yale School of Public Health, a legendary AIDS activist. We'll be right back with him after this. We're back now with Gregg Gonsalves, who is an ACT UP veteran from the AIDS movement. He's now an assistant professor of epidemiology at Yale School of Public Health. Professor, thanks for being here. One of the successes of the AIDS movement was penetrating a seemingly impenetrable bureaucracy to get drugs developed and into bodies faster than the system otherwise would have got them there. Do you envision any sort of treatment activism like that around therapeutics for coronavirus, or indeed for a vaccine?
I think there are people already, as we speak, working on trying to figure out the problems that happened with the diagnostic scale-up in the United States, that are thinking about vaccines and treatments and doing that sort of treatment activism. We have the connections with the scientists, with the drug companies, with the diagnostic companies now that we didn't have 30, 40 years ago.
Because you changed the system.
But we changed the system. What's difficult now is that the top of the power pyramid, the president, the vice president, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, are an impenetrable fortress. And it's been very hard to think about how we can get into that sort of circle of influence to make a difference.
Do you think that public pressure and citizen activism and direct action and the sort of things that were so effective in the AIDS movement have a role to play here, either now or in the future? And when we start to think about the hospital crunches that are coming, when we start to think about the real point of the spear public health calamities that are coming, do you think that the government's response can be made better by citizens making it so?
I think we have to make noise. It's the only thing we can do at this point, and it's incumbent on journalists, on activists, on academics to raise the alarm. We don't have weeks and months. We have days before our trajectory starts to mirror that of Italy's from 2 weeks ago. We have to do what we can to point out the failings in the current response and push them to do better. I know it's a daunting task, but we really don't have any choice.
Gregg Gonsalves, thank you for being here. I want to shake your hand. I'm not going to.
No.
I'm teaching myself not to do that anymore. It's great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Explain these breakthrough infections and how concerned you think people should be in the United States, around the world. In LA, 20% of the new infections are people who've been fully vaccinated.
Well, let's put it this way. You know, these vaccines are enormously potent at preventing serious disease and death, right? So if you catch SARS-CoV-2, having been vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines, you're likely to have an asymptomatic or mild infection. The point is that it's all about exposure, right? You know, these vaccines are not 100% effective. And if you put 10 people in a room who are unvaccinated, shedding the Delta variant, which is highly contagious, as Dr. Fauci mentioned, you're just putting the vaccines at a distinct disadvantage. The vaccine-acquired immunity that you've got is not a brick wall. They're 95% effective, 91% effective. I can't remember the exact figures, but that doesn't mean 100%. And so you need to be able to protect yourself from being basically awash in a sea of virus where vaccines can stumble. That being said, the number of vaccinated people who are in hospitals right now is a tiny, tiny proportion of the people hospitalized. 99% of people who are in hospitals right now are unvaccinated individuals in the United States.
We just have 30 seconds, Greg, but as you said, you were a longtime AIDS activist. We're talking to you as an epidemiologist at Yale University, but can you talk about the role of activism, for example, for what you think needs to be done for Biden at this point to ensure that people around the world are vaccinated, which would protect, of course, his own country, the United States?
So AIDS activists are back in the game for COVID-19, and many of us who were arguing for access to COVID-19 vaccines and mRNA scale-up are the same people who were fighting for global AIDS treatment access 20 years ago. The point is, this is a political problem right now. It's not a technological one. It's not a legal one. It is a political problem. And AIDS activists, people who care about the health of the planet, who care about the health of Americans, need to get to the White House, to get to the officials in Congress who can get to the White House and say, get to work. The point is we can beat COVID globally if we have the political will to do so.
I spoke to Dr. Anthony Fauci about the administration's vaccination plan for younger kids, and I wondered whether acting before the vaccinations are approved is somewhat presumptuous.
I don't think it's presumptuous because we have made it very clear that whatever happens is going to be dependent on the regulatory decision of the FDA and the recommendations on the part of the CDC. We want to have the vaccine already distributed in pediatric offices, in pharmacies, in children's hospitals, and in community centers. If we did not do that preparation, there would be a time lag in getting the vaccines to the children.
Let's talk about the resistance, defiance, whatever you want to call it, to the current vaccines among adults. What do you anticipate when it comes to giving shots to children, where people will lean?
Well, I hope they'll be enthusiastic about it. Children of all ages do get infected as readily as adults. Many of them have asymptomatic infections, so you don't notice it. But they do get infected, and they do pass the infection. So we would hope that family members who are responsible for the children will realize that and will be enthusiastic about getting their children vaccinated.
One of the complaints of some over mandates is the idea that government is telling people what they can do with their bodies. Does it at all make you uncomfortable, the idea of telling people they must have the vaccine?
Well, I certainly would prefer that we don't have to do that. You have a pandemic right now. This is not your run-of-the-mill situation. And sometimes very unusual situations like this require unique and unusual activities. And mandates is one of them. Obviously, you don't like to tell people what to do, but sometimes for the good of society, that's necessary.
Brass Check TV, free to you, not free to us. We've got a server bill, we've got an email software bill, we've got a tech helper bill, and that happens every month. So to everybody that is supporting us financially, that's paying for their subscription in one way or another, we really appreciate it. If you're not, consider doing so. Everybody's got money for the newspaper and the cable bill and all that. Do you have money for media that's actually serving you? That's really the issue here. And when you help us, it allows us to get this information out to the world. So thanks to all our supporters, and if you're not a supporter already, please consider becoming one.